Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
They told me not to make it a big deal, that it was just college, that everyone does it now, and it's not the achievement I was making it out to be. As if 4 years of working double shifts at a 24-hour diner, taking night classes with professors who barely knew my name, dragging myself out of bed after 3 hours of sleep to catch the early bus just to get a decent seat in the lecture hall, was just some cute little errand I'd completed on a whim. My mother said it with that voice she uses when she thinks she's being supportive, but is actually just tired and a little annoyed. Honey, of course we're proud. We just don't want you to blow this up into something bigger than it is. And my dad, sitting across the kitchen table in his paint-splattered hoodie from the garage, didn't even look up from his phone when he muttered, "What do you want, a trophy for going to class?" That was the moment I realized graduation wasn't about the piece of paper they'd be handing me. It wasn't about the speeches or the little cap and gown, and it sure as hell wasn't about them. It was about the chair. That one singular, empty chair that was going to be in the crowd, reserved in my mind for the people who were supposed to show up and didn't. Because when you've spent years pouring your entire soul into proving you're worth something, to a world that keeps looking past you, and the only thing you ask in return is to not be alone when you finally step into the light, being told you're overreacting cuts deeper than they'll ever admit. I didn't cry in front of them. I'd learned a long time ago not to give them the satisfaction of seeing it get to me. My sister Ava overheard the conversation from the hallway and didn't say anything at the time. She just raised one perfectly plucked eyebrow and went back to her phone. Later that night, though, I saw her post on Facebook. Public, of course. My sister's still acting like graduating from Ohio State is some Nobel Prize or something. It was Ava's signature move, insult disguised as sarcasm, posted just within plausible deniability, but sharp enough to draw blood if you looked too long. And even though I knew I should ignore it, that I had bigger things to worry about, that part of me that still wanted to believe she might actually one day root for me just broke a little more. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't call her out. I just closed the app, powered off my phone, and opened the confirmation email from the university that said I'd been selected as one of the student speakers for graduation. I hadn't told anyone because, frankly, I didn't think they'd care. And now I knew that was true. I was going to deliver my speech in front of thousands, and not a single person with my last name would be there to hear it. I started preparing anyway. I bought a used dress online for $40, steamed it in the bathroom while running the hot water because we didn't have an iron. I borrowed heels from my coworker at the diner, who said I could keep them as long as I promised not to trip up the stairs in them. And I practiced my speech to the mirror, night after night, making adjustments until the sentences didn't just sound good, they hit. I didn't want it to be a performance. I wanted it to be honest, raw, and just self-aware enough to cut through the expected platitudes. I was going to stand up there and tell the truth. And the truth was I got myself here. Not my parents, not my sister, not anyone who sat through my childhood, treating my ambitions like a hobby I'd outgrow. While Ava had been flown out to camps, given cars at 16, paraded around every school award ceremony as if she were royalty, I'd scraped together scholarships like breadcrumbs, learned to fake a smile when they forgot my birthday, and figured out how to write cover letters without anyone to proofread them. Graduation day came faster than I expected. The sky was threatening rain, and the parking lot was already full when I arrived. I walked into the stadium alone, clutching my speech in one hand and a plastic bag holding my heels in the other. I spotted the row reserved for family members of speakers and tried not to look too long at the empty seats with little name tags taped to them. The seat with my family's name on it was perfectly centered, as if someone out there believed they'd actually come. I gave my speech. I don't remember half of it now. I remember my throat going dry, the lights being hotter than I expected, and the strange moment in the middle where I almost cried, right before the line. This is for the students who studied on lunch breaks, who walked to campus in the snow, who missed birthdays and weddings and didn't get a single "we're proud of you" in return. You are not invisible. There was a pause afterward, a breathless kind of silence, And then the clapping started. I smiled, not because of the applause, but because I'd said it. I'd finally said it. And they hadn't needed to be there to hear it. I stepped off the stage, phone buzzing in my robe pocket. I didn't check it until I got to the parking lot, shoes dangling from my fingers, hair already falling out of place. The first thing I saw when I unlocked it wasn't a text from mom or dad. It wasn't even a missed call. It was a message request. From someone I didn't know. The profile picture was of a teenage girl in a graduation cap. The message read, "Are you the one who gave that speech today? My mom cried watching it. I did too. Thank you for saying what I felt my whole life." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then opened Facebook. Ava's post, gone. Along with every snarky comment, every laughing emoji, deleted. No explanation, no apology, just silence. When I got home that night, still half-drenched from the walk between the stadium and the bus stop and clinging to the last bit of adrenaline that had carried me through the speech, I didn't walk in expecting a parade or a warm meal waiting on the table or even a passing congratulations thrown over someone's shoulder. What I walked into was silence, the kind that isn't neutral or peaceful but calculated and sharp-edged. Like everyone had already decided I wasn't going to make a big deal out of it this time. And therefore, they didn't have to either. The kitchen smelled faintly of overcooked eggs and burnt toast, a breakfast my dad had probably made for himself before heading to the garage. And my mom was at the table with her laptop open, tabs full of real estate listings and online coupons, her eyes flickering between them like she was training for a mental decathlon that didn't involve a single moment of acknowledgement for what her daughter had just done. I stood there, diploma folders still damp from the rain, plastic bag holding my heels, dragging slightly across the floor, and waited, maybe just 5 seconds too long, for someone to look up, to ask, to care. But the moment passed like it always did. And when I finally dropped my bag on the counter with more force than necessary, my mother flinched and said, without glancing away from the screen, "We saved you some pizza. It's in the fridge." That was it. No mention of the speech. No how did it go. No we saw the live stream, which I knew had been aired locally because the university had posted the link everywhere. Just cold pizza and a family that had collectively decided that pretending nothing happened was easier than confronting why they didn't show up. It would have been easier to let it fester quietly, like all the other little slights that had accumulated over the years. Birthdays missed, wins ignored, sacrifices rewritten as selfishness. But something in me cracked, not explosively, not loudly, but in the way that tectonic plates shift, slow, unstoppable, and world-changing beneath the surface. I didn't say a word. I just walked past her, straight to my room, where I kicked off the heels, peeled the dress from my body like a shed skin, and sat in front of my laptop with the notifications still glowing in the corner. That message from the girl I didn't know, Katie her name was the first in a growing list. Within 2 hours, there were 30. By morning, nearly 70. People I had never met, from neighboring schools, from small towns I'd never visited, from single moms, retired teachers, former classmates I barely remembered, all of them writing variations of the same thing. "I felt that. I saw myself in your story. Thank you for saying it out loud." I scrolled through the messages in quiet disbelief, each one a tiny drop of validation in a drought that had lasted years. Some shared their own graduation stories. Others told me about the empty rows in their own ceremonies, how they'd stared at the crowd trying to pretend it didn't hurt. One woman said she'd watched the clip with her teenage daughter and cried when I said, "You are not invisible." A man from 3 states away told me his wife was the first in her family to go to college and had never felt recognized for it until that night. But it wasn't just strangers, because mixed into the sea of kind words were familiar names. People from my high school who hadn't spoken to me since senior year, old co-workers from the diner who I thought had forgotten me, even a TA from a freshman-level economics class who said they still remembered how hard I worked and how quiet I was. It was surreal, like the entire outside world had finally heard what I'd been screaming into the void for years, and now they were screaming it back, just so I wouldn't forget that I wasn't alone. And that's when I saw it, A screenshot. Not just one, but 3, 4, eventually a whole thread. Someone had saved Ava's post before she deleted it. My sister's still acting like graduating from Ohio State is some Nobel Prize or something. All that time, and she's still gonna end up back at the diner. It wasn't just the words, though they were sharp enough to make my stomach turn. It was the comments that followed. One of her friends had laughed and said, "Wait, she's valedictorian of a commuter school? LMAO." Another wrote, "I didn't even know she was still in school. Girl stays invisible." But the worst one, the one that clenched my jaw and made me feel heat crawl up my neck, was from Ava herself. She only got that speech because no one else wanted it. No one cares what the quiet girl has to say. What she hadn't counted on was that the quiet girl had been handed a microphone, and people had listened. The screenshots were spreading, shared, commented on, stitched together into threads about sibling jealousy, about families that dim one child to spotlight another. There was a caption someone added that simply read, "This is what it looks like when you glow up, and your family tries to unplug the power." I didn't share them. I didn't need to. But I knew Ava was watching. Because the next day, while scrolling through a new batch of messages, one from a small college newspaper asking for an interview, another from a nonprofit wanting to connect, I noticed Ava's name pop up in my notifications. Not on Facebook this time. On Instagram. She had liked a photo I hadn't posted publicly. One of me standing on the graduation stage, smiling, sun on my face, gown billowing slightly in the wind, captioned by someone else, "Valedictorian, alone in the crowd, but not in the world." A few minutes later, I got a message. Not an apology, not even a question, just a period, a single dot. As if to say, "I see what you did." And I smiled, because I hadn't even started yet. By the time Monday rolled around, the quiet ripple that had started with a single shared video on a local education page had transformed into something larger than I ever imagined, something that couldn't be brushed aside or minimized the way so many of my other moments had been. What began as a heartwarming segment about overlooked graduates had morphed into a kind of community-wide reckoning, a collective realization that maybe we don't do enough for the people who carry everything quietly, who push through storms without umbrellas, who don't shout when they're hurting because they've learned no one listens when they do. I didn't expect the local news station to re-air the clip during prime time, nor did I anticipate that it would be the version with the wide-angle shot of the audience, where my row of seats, reserved, labeled but unmistakably empty, stood out like a missing tooth in a forced smile. The messages didn't slow down. They came in waves now, faster and deeper. People began tagging me in their own graduation photos, some standing alone, others with strangers they'd met that day, who had clapped louder for them than their own blood ever had. My inbox had transformed into a confessional booth, filled with stories of estranged parents, silent siblings, and celebrations turned bitter by the absence of those who were supposed to care. And buried in all that digital noise, one message stood out. Not because it was particularly long or emotional, but because it came from someone who had never acknowledged my efforts before, not once in 22 years of life. It was from my father. His message was barely 2 lines, and yet it felt heavier than any graduation speech I delivered. He wrote, "Didn't know you were going to speak. Didn't know it was going to be on the news. Your mother and I, we didn't mean to miss that. There was no 'I'm proud of you,' no congratulations, just a vague admission of ignorance wrapped in the kind of apology that leaves all the weight on your shoulders. Because if they didn't know, then it couldn't have been their fault, right?" And that was the thing that stuck in my throat, heavier than any resentment or anger I thought I had gotten past. The knowledge that even when faced with evidence of my worth, they still couldn't bring themselves to say the words that might have mattered. Later that day, while I was sitting in a quiet coffee shop off Main Street, sipping something far too expensive for someone still technically unemployed, my old political science professor texted me, asking if I'd seen what people were saying on Twitter. I hadn't. I didn't even have a public Twitter account. But when I searched my name, there it was. Dozens of posts under a makeshift hashtag. #NoOneInTheStands. It wasn't just my video anymore. It had become a symbol, a rallying cry for every student who had crossed a finish line, with no one waiting at the other end. The clip of my speech had been reposted with subtitles, quotes pulled and overlaid on black and white photos of cap and gown silhouettes, entire threads devoted to dissecting the power of my words, particularly that one sentence that seemed to echo more loudly than all the others. We are not invisible. We've just been looking in the wrong direction for applause. That night, a local nonprofit called me. They had seen the video, they had read the articles. They wanted to offer me a position. Something temporary at first, outreach work, youth mentorship, nothing glamorous, but something meaningful, something real. I sat there listening to the woman on the other end describe the role with the kind of enthusiasm that felt almost foreign to me, and I realized this was the first time someone was offering me something not out of obligation, but out of recognition. They didn't care about my last name, didn't know my sister, hadn't attended high school with my mother. They had simply watched a girl with no one in the stands speak truth with trembling hands and decided that was enough. When I got home, I found Ava in the kitchen. She was in yoga pants and a sweatshirt that didn't belong to her, probably one of the many borrowed from friends or exes, and she was scrolling on her phone with that glazed-over look she always wore when she was watching her own reflection in the digital mirror. I thought she might say something. She had liked the post, after all. She had sent the dot. Maybe this was going to be the moment, the rare fleeting truce where she'd admit, in her own way, that I had done something real. Instead, she looked up and said, with a tone so dry it could have started a brush fire, "You're kind of famous for being pitiful, huh?" And there it was. The moment shattered, the truce disintegrated before it ever formed. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I just walked past her, set the job offer printout on the counter, and kept going. But later, when I couldn't sleep, I opened Facebook again, out of habit more than anything, and saw something strange, something that made me sit up a little straighter. A photo posted by one of the girls from my graduating class. Nothing special at first glance, just a wide shot of the stadium, crowd in full view, tiny figures marching across the stage. But when I zoomed in, there she was. Ava, standing at the very back of the crowd, in sunglasses, arms crossed, head slightly tilted, not in pride, not in support, but in that calculating way she always stood when she was somewhere she didn't want to be, but needed to witness. She had been there, not in the front, not in the row of family, but there. She came and left before I walked the stage. She hadn't spoken, she hadn't clapped, but she had watched, and now the comments were catching up to her, because while she had deleted the original post, the internet has a funny way of preserving things when you least want it to. The screenshots were circulating. People were connecting the dots. Someone had posted a side-by-side of the quote from my speech and Ava's snide comment from 2 days prior. The caption read, "When you try to dim someone else's light but end up exposing your own shadow instead." And Ava, she stopped posting entirely. No selfies, no inspirational quotes, no dance videos, just silence again, but this time not mine. And I had no intention of breaking it. There is a strange kind of satisfaction that comes not from confrontation, not from some fiery showdown or explosive scene where all the buried resentment is finally unleashed, but from silence, measured, intentional silence, that falls like a curtain over people who have spent years talking over you, dismissing you, editing the narrative of your life in real time to suit their own version of events. I had always been the quiet one, the one who did the work and never asked for a medal, the one who stayed out of the way while Ava held the spotlight, like it belonged to her by birthright, while our parents watched her with that unfiltered adoration usually reserved for child prodigies or lottery winners. And now, for the first time in my life, my silence was not submission, it was control. After the nonprofit's offer became official, I moved forward quickly. I signed the paperwork within a day, met with the team over Zoom, and within a week, I was working from a corner desk in their downtown office, A modest but beautiful building with sunlit windows and a coffee machine that worked more reliably than any appliance in our family kitchen. They gave me a key card with my name printed on it, a small plaque for my desk, and a sense of belonging that didn't feel like charity. It felt earned, and more than anything, it felt like a quiet kind of justice, a space that didn't care about my family's presence or absence, only about the work I could do. At home, things shifted in the way fault lines shift before a quake, subtle at first, but unmistakable if you know where to look. My mother started leaving job applications for government internships on the kitchen counter, with sticky notes that said things like, "Thought this might interest you," or "Looks like something you'd be good at," as though her earlier dismissal of my graduation had never happened. My father avoided me altogether, retreating into the garage like it was a bomb shelter, tinkering with car parts and muttering things under his breath about overreacting kids and damn social media. Ava, on the other hand, seemed to shrink into herself, not outwardly, not obviously, but in that way only siblings can detect. The silence between posts, the longer than usual pauses at dinner, the increasingly sharp tone she used when talking to our parents about anything that even remotely involved me. And then the flyer arrived. Folded neatly into the day's mail, sandwiched between a grocery store ad and a credit card promotion, was a glossy invitation to the upcoming PTA elections at the local high school, an event I normally would have thrown away without a second glance if it weren't for the familiar name printed in bold near the bottom, Ava Halbrook, candidate for president. I stared at it for a full minute, trying to process what it meant, what it suggested about her sudden shift into local visibility, and why, of all the things she could have pursued, she had chosen the one that would place her directly in front of the same community that was still quietly sharing the screenshots of her deleted posts, like digital relics from a modern parable. I didn't mention it to anyone. I didn't confront her or question her motives. I just folded the flyer back up, slid it into the side drawer of my desk, and let it sit there like a seed, because I had a feeling it might grow into something much more revealing. In the meantime, I focused on my work. I helped design a mentorship program for first-generation college students, coordinated outreach efforts for young women in underserved communities, and spoke at small events hosted in church basements and school auditoriums, where the applause was slow but honest, and the people who showed up were there not because they had to be, but because they wanted to hear what someone like me had to say. One afternoon, after a talk at a community center, a woman approached me, a school counselor from a neighboring district. She said she'd watched my graduation speech with her daughter and that it had sparked conversations in their home they'd been avoiding for years. Then she leaned in slightly and said, "Your sister's name came up at a PTA meeting last week. Just thought you should know. People are asking questions." I nodded, not because I was surprised, but because I had expected this. Ava had built a reputation on charm and surface-level likability, but the internet never forgets, and it turns out people don't either. Not when they've seen someone be publicly cruel, not when the cruelty is directed at a sibling who never clapped back, who just kept going. That evening, I received a text from my mother, long, winding, and strangely defensive. It started with, "We all make mistakes," moved quickly into, "You embarrassed us more than you realize," and ended with, "Your sister's hurting too, you know." There was no acknowledgement of the years I spent being overlooked, no apology for the graduation, no mention of the fact that Ava's comments had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. Just deflection, wrapped in guilt, handed to me like I was supposed to hold it, and apologize for not protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I pulled out a print of the graduation photo that had been shared so many times I'd lost track of the original source. The one where I'm smiling mid-speech, sunlight on my face, and the row of family seats behind me is unmistakably empty. I flipped it over, wrote something simple on the back, and mailed it to my parents with no return address. I only looked alone. I wasn't. No signature, no explanation, just the truth. And a few days later, I saw that Ava had locked all her social media accounts. Her campaign website redirected to a blank page, and the flyer in my desk drawer, irrelevant now, but I wasn't done. Because some messages aren't meant for the people you grew up with. They're meant for the ones watching from a distance, the ones who understand what it means to be alone in a crowd and still speak anyway. By the time summer curled its way into the edges of spring and the air in our neighborhood began to taste like barbecue smoke and second chances, I had already packed most of my things into the back of a borrowed van and moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a used bookstore on the quieter side of town, where no one knew my sister's name or my family's history or the fine print of the speech that had, for a brief and surreal moment, become more famous than the girl who gave it. The walls of the apartment were chipped in places, and the pipes groaned in protest whenever I ran the shower too long. But the windows caught the morning light in this golden, forgiving way that made even the dust look like intention. And for the first time in my life, every single thing in the room, every book, every fork, every worn blanket folded at the foot of my bed, belonged to me not because someone allowed it, not because someone else left it behind, but because I chose it. It was in that quiet place, surrounded by secondhand furniture and the buzz of a neighborhood that didn't care who I used to be, that I finally understood something I'd never really let myself say out loud. Some people are family by biology, by history, by habit, but others earn it. Others show up when no one else does. Others listen when it's inconvenient, clap when no one else is watching, and remember your name even when it's not trending. And while the people in my old house may have carried my photo in their wallets once upon a time, or cheered for me when it made them look good, they had also been the ones to pull the curtain shut when I tried to shine. That's not family, that's marketing. In the weeks following the mailed photograph and the implosion of Ava's ill-fated PTA campaign, my phone stayed eerily quiet, as if the entire household had entered a mutual agreement not to contact the family traitor, the one who had the audacity to speak without permission. I didn't mind. The silence suited me. It gave me room to think, to breathe, to work. The nonprofit role evolved quickly, and I found myself not just coordinating programs, but leading them, speaking at conferences, drafting grants, creating workshops that used my own experience as a blueprint for navigating the suffocating expectations placed on first-generation students, especially the ones with golden child siblings who monopolized attention like oxygen in a sealed room. One Friday afternoon, while I was drafting materials for an upcoming youth event, I received an email from a reporter whose name I vaguely recognized. She worked for a state education publication and had apparently followed the trajectory of my graduation story with some interest. She asked, with an unusual mix of professionalism and warmth, whether I'd be open to participating in a campaign for state school brochures and community outreach initiatives aimed at encouraging underrepresented students to pursue higher education. She wrote that the department had seen the speech, had discussed it in internal meetings, and believed that my story, not the viral video, not the controversy, but the real arc, might help others feel seen. I sat with that email for a while, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I realized how rare it is to be asked, sincerely, whether you're ready to be heard again, not exploited, not used, not applauded from a distance, but actually heard. I responded yes. And when they sent the materials for the brochure, there it was, my photo, the one from the stage, the one with the empty row behind me. Only now the caption underneath read, "You don't need a crowd to cross the stage. You just need a reason." A few days later, I got a call from my father. It came in during dinner while I was stirring a pot of lentils and listening to an old jazz record I'd found at a yard sale. I stared at the caller ID for a full 30 seconds, then answered, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. His voice was familiar, but hesitant, like someone trying to walk across ice they know they helped freeze. He didn't mention the speech, or the job, or the apartment I hadn't invited them to see. He didn't say anything about Ava's sudden disappearance from public life, or the way the town's whisper network had replaced her name with mine. Instead, after a long pause, he asked, "Did you send that picture?" I didn't lie. I said yes. He didn't thank me. He didn't apologize. He just said, "Your mother wanted to know. Ava's been, well, she's asking who shared that old Facebook post." There was a question buried in his tone, but I refused to dig it out. I stirred the lentils again, let the silence stretch like pulled thread, and finally said, "Funny how fast things resurface when they sting." He didn't respond. We sat in that quiet long enough to prove that whatever bridge had once connected us was, at the very least, no longer operational. When he finally hung up, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt clean. Weeks passed. The campaign launched. Brochures were distributed to hundreds of schools across the state. My face became a fixture on guidance counselor bulletin boards, in community college offices, and in the inboxes of students who had been told, as I had, to keep their heads down, not to make a fuss, to stop acting like their success was something worth celebrating if no one clapped for it. Messages trickled in again, not with fanfare, but with depth. Quiet thank yous, tears shared by strangers, the kinds of notes that felt less like praise and more like connection. And then, one afternoon, as I was locking up my office, I heard my name from behind me, not the soft Jenna of a stranger or a coworker, but the sharp, practiced version, the one said through teeth. I turned. Ava stood there, sunglasses off, makeup heavier than usual, hands clasped in a way that looked rehearsed. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't congratulate me. She said, "You really think they care about you? You think all this changes what it was like growing up?" I looked at her for a long time, not at the girl who had once been the center of every room, but at the woman who couldn't stand not being the headline. "No," I said, "I don't think it changes the past, but it's changing the future. And that's enough for me." She walked away without another word. As I watched her disappear into the parking lot, head down, heels clicking too loudly, I felt something deep in my chest loosen. Not bitterness, not anger, but the final piece of weight that had anchored me to people who never wanted me to fly. And in that moment, with the sun dipping low and the streets humming with the sound of a world that had kept spinning without their applause, I realized that family is not who shares your blood or your last name, or even your memories, but who claps when you rise, even if they had to sit in the back row to see it.